Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's lecture on the first part of the novel Under the Feet of Jesus. Beginning with some background information on the author, Elena Maria Viramontes. She was born and grew up in East Los Angeles. While a graduate student in an English department, she's told by a professor that she doesn't belong in the program because she's writing about Latinos. And this actually ends up disencouraging her. She ends up leaving the program and ends up taking about a 10-year hiatus before deciding to return to writing. But it indicates how she herself has had, obviously, experiences of unbelonging based on her own writing. She received her MFA from the University of California, Irvine in 1994. Her published works include The Moths and Other Stories, which is a story collection, Under the Feet of Jesus, and her more recent novel, Their Dogs Came With Them. She is currently, and has been for a while, a professor in the English department at Cornell University. The main characters that we see in this novel are Estrella, who also goes by Star. She's 13 years old and is the eldest child of the family. We also have Perfecto Flores. His name in English means perfect flowers. He's the family patriarch and is much older than his wife, but he's also not the father of any of the children. And then there's Petra, who is constantly referred to as, quote unquote, the mother. So it really captures the degree to which motherhood and being a mother is a big part of her role. And so the story is about a migrant working family working somewhere in the fields of California. She's not specific as to where, because that is the whole point, that they don't have a particular place or home. They're constantly on the move, depending on what's in harvest at any particular season. So she's depicting here the life of the farm worker, focusing on the everyday struggles of a Mexican-American migrant working family, their constant lack of stability, always moving with each season. So the bungalow that they're staying in right now is just a temporary home. And there's also a sense throughout the novel of how much work determines every aspect of their lives, as captured in this particular quote. It was always a question of work, and work depended on the harvest, the car running, their health, the conditions of the road, how long the money held out in the weather, which meant they could depend on nothing. Of course, we see quite a number of gendered experiences here, how women in particular experience their lives differently than the men. We see in earlier part in the novel where Petra is considering leaving her first husband, and she's advised by the woman against it, telling her, you'll be a forever alone woman. And the suggestion of how horrible it would be to be such a woman. In contrast, men have the freedom to leave, like her first husband did, while women with children must remain for the sake of their children. And you see this expressed by Estrella when she says, was it he who had the nerve to disappear, as if his life belonged to no one but him? So men get to have a sense of ownership, however limited, of their own lives, whereas the women don't. We also see the mothers and wives have a second shift, conducting family care work after a day in the fields, and we see Petra constantly in this second shift, bathing the children, cooking, keeping the bungalow safe from scorpions and so on. But you also see that they don't stop being mothers and caretaking for their children when they're out in the fields, where they have to bring their children with them to the fields. And while they're doing their work there, also keeping an eye on the children, making sure that they're kept out of danger. Now, the reading is trying to portray, right, the contrast between the image of the noble farmer in the United States versus the reality of farm working life. And so in the United States, the farmer is often depicted as the embodiment of American independence, hard work, and grit. However, here in the novel, she's focusing on the figure of the farm worker and their reality, who are the ones who are employed to cultivate, till, grow, harvest, and otherwise work to produce agricultural goods. And you see this distinction in these two images. One is the sun-made image of the brand, the raisins brand that you might have seen yourself, in contrast to what the reality actually is for those who do harvest and work in the fields. This second image on the right is a rendition by artist Esther Hernandez that really captures the toil and the conditions under which they work. And you see that below, she calls it not sun-made, but sun-mad raisins, unnaturally grown with insecticides, miticides, herbicides, and fungicides. And in the novel, the author addresses this distinction directly through Estrella. When she's working in the grapevines, she describes what the work actually entails and thinks to herself, quote, "Carrying the full basket to the paper was not like the picture on the red raisin boxes Estrella saw in the markets, not like the woman wearing a fluffy bonnet, holding up the grapes with her smiling ruby lips, the sun of a flat orange behind her." She would go on to describe the experience much closer to the image that we see by the artist. The author also challenges stereotypes of who farm workers are. Farm workers are not all undocumented. Petra keeps the documents proving their citizenship in an envelope tucked under the feet of Jesus in her altar. Farm workers are also not all immigrants. Petra's children are all born in the United States and have birthright citizenship, while Alejo is from Texas. Farm workers are also not all Latinx. The Deveridge family are Anglo-American workers who are there in one of their field experiences. We also see this connection being made between tools and knowledge, where she compares the frustration of not understanding what the tools in Perfecto's toolbox are to her own school experiences. In school, teachers cared more about her cleanliness than whether she was learning or not. And this was very discouraging for her in terms of wanting to learn or wanting to learn how to read and so on. Perfecta Flores, unlike her teachers, takes the time to teach her about each tool and their functions. And so she begins to understand how certain kinds of knowledge are valuable. Knowledge that allows you to know and understand how tools function and the multiple ways in which they can be used. And you see it in this quote where she says, "She lifted the pry bar in her hand, felt the coolness of iron and power of function, weighed the significance it awarded her, and soon she came to understand how essential it was to know these things." That was when she began to read. So she starts to make a correlation between these tools and their function and their potential power with reading as another tool. The reading also engages with issues of environmental racism, where the workers are constantly exposed to pesticides in the fields and the potential effects this has, particularly on their bodies. Estrella had heard through the grapevine about the water, and knew Big Mac, the foreman, lied about the pesticides not spilling into the ditch, but the water seemed clear and cool and irresistible on such a hot day. So there's no other alternatives to the poisoned water, the poisoned fields, the pesticides that are falling on them and around them. They have no options, right? So they have to, if they want to drink water, this is the water that's available to them. Estrella and Maxine wonder about how their environment might impact their future children. So these children are aware of the dangers. And we see it in this quote, you think because of the water, our babies are going to come out with no mouth or something, right? So they're aware of the potential dangers of the poisoned water and so on. And we see it also when Alejo encounters the hair-lipped boy outside of the barn, right? The boy represents, right, the kinds of physical issues, physical disfigurements that living in this environment can potentially have. Now, despite all the very concrete ways in which these individuals are experiencing a sense of unbelonging, that they don't belong anywhere, and that their labor is really the only thing they have, and how it is abused, you do see these moments of claiming belonging. And we see this in this quote where Alejo is thinking how he loved stones and the history of stones because he believed himself to be a solid mass of boulder thrust out of the earth and not some particle lost in infinite and cosmic space. With a simple touch of a hand and a hungry wonder of his connection to it all, he not only became a part of the earth's history, but would exist as the boulders did for eternity. So his image of himself as a boulder, as something that is strong and stuck to the ground, that is here eternally and has a place here eternally, is a way for him to see himself as grounded in the land, in the history of this country. Yet, as we said, there are constant threats to unbelonging that the family experiences. We particularly see this when Estrella momentarily confuses the floodlights of a baseball playing field with La Migra chasing her, quoting, "The border patrol," she thought, and she tried to remember which side she was on and which side of the wire mesh she was safe in. So even though she is born in the United States, she has a birth certificate, she is still in this environment where she viscerally feels the potential threat of being taken away. She runs, as a result of this confusing experience, back to the bungalow and runs straight to grasp a pry bar from Perfecto's toolbox. So those tools begin to represent not just the function that they're there for, but also as a way to potentially protect herself and her family from these threats. But the mother's response is interesting here because she says to her, "Don't run scared. You stay there and look them in the eye. Don't let them make you feel you did a crime for picking the vegetables they'll be eating for dinner. If they stop you, if they try to pull you into the green vans, you tell them the birth certificates are under the feet of Jesus. Just tell them que tienes una madre aquí. You are not an orphan." And she pointed a red finger to the earth, aquí. So when she's suggesting, telling them, you have a mother here, but she doesn't mean herself. She means the land as her mother, that she, Estrella, belongs here just as much, if not more so, than the potential border patrol that might be chasing her and trying to tell her that she doesn't belong here. So this is another similar moment to Alejo's claim of seeing himself as a boulder that belongs here for eternity. Another thing that's interesting in this novel and in the author's style of writing is that she meticulously describes the bodies of her characters, capturing the embodiment of their experiences, right? These are not intellectual, theoretical kinds of experiences. These are experiences that they're having consistently on their bodies. And so there's no way to not be aware of what they're experiencing. And here are some examples that I pulled from this first part. Estrella carried the full basket with the help of a sore hip and kneeled before the clusters of grapes. The muscles of her back coiled like barbed wire and clawed against whatever movement she made. The mother struggled upward, straightening one knee, then the other. And Estrella noticed how purple and thick her veins were getting, like veins choking the movement of her legs. And so this way of describing her mother's veins like vines recalls back to Estrella being in the field, working in the grapevines, right? So there's almost sort of no distinction made between the grapevines of the field and the veins in the mother's leg like vines. And of course, there's the graphic description of Alejo's body's immediate reaction to being sprayed with pesticides. His clothes were dampened through, then the sheet of his skin absorbed the chemical, and his whole body began to cramp from the shrinking pull of his skin, squeezing against his bones. By the end of this part, we also see Perfecto's desire for home. He has been in this country for a very long time. He's 73 years old, and he's starting to think about feeling like he has done enough, right? And is tired, right? He talks about being tired all the time, but especially tired of this life where he doesn't have any kind of stability. So he begins to feel an urgent need to return to his first home, where he'd had his first wife and children. As I mentioned, he's 73 years old, and there's also this fear of forgetting his way home, right? And how scary that is for him at this point in his life, not only that he doesn't have a home, but that he might forget how to get back to a home he remembers having once. And so he becomes obsessed with tearing down the barn to earn enough money to return home. But he's keeping at this point all these thoughts to himself, right? So it also sort of puts the reader in this space of instability, right? Wondering, oh my God, is he going to leave Petra? And what will that do to the family? He's the one who has the car, right? All these sort of very real potential consequences of him deciding to leave the family at this point. And the barn appears over and over again in this first part of the novel, but I didn't want to touch on it just yet because it continues to appear throughout the second part. And I really want to wait for that conversation once you are all done with the whole novel, so we can really think about what does the barn mean, right? And what does it represent to these characters? So this ends the lecture for this week. I look forward to seeing your thoughts. Have a great week.